to take up the theme that Yanis Varoufakis mentioned in his greeting earlier this morning. What starts here changes the world. I'm very pleased to say that Pedro Paez, 16 years ago, was my PhD student. At least I had the privilege of serving on his committee, which I believe was chaired by David Kendrick. Is that correct? So, and he left here in 1999, and not coincidentally, in 2006, things really began to change in Ecuador. Pedro has served as the Minister for Economic Policy. He presently holds the position of dear to the heart of a Galbraith, I have to say, the Superintendent for Market Power Control. Would you please welcome Pedro Paez back to the University of Texas.
Muchas gracias, muy gentil. Can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Jamie, for your kind invitation, and I'm very honored to have this final speech in such a wonderful event. It's been plenty of illuminating participations here. I have to move quickly, so I think we have had plenty of examples about the very pernicious relationship between debt and democracy. Democracy, austerity, and the whole discourse about inevitability of some specific kind of recipes of economic policy are directly used to erode democracy. I directly use not because of technical situations, inexorable technical situations, but because some specific targets and some specific geopolitical interests involved on this. So what I think is important to discuss is in a broader framework, which are the structural conditions, the structural roots of this crisis, and the need for a re-regulation and a new financial architecture as necessary but not sufficient conditions in order to build up a new horizon for the globe with the possibility of a humanistic and democratic exit. And I think that we have the technical conditions for this. Economists and other people could have other scientific evidence and theoretical frameworks that could give you very solid foundations for another path. There is no inevitability. It is a lie, the whole idea of there is no alternative. All the ocean of impossibilities has been created. They were created in Latin America, in the South, 30 years ago, and they are trying to create the same ocean of impossibilities out of guilt, out of anxiety, and out of a condition of kidnapping of your imagination. So this is a crisis of civilization. We have beneath the macro and financial indicators a political and geopolitical crisis that has been latent for decades now. You have, since the 60s, a very important reduction in terms of the rhythm of growth because political decisions to surrender to the conditions imposed by a new type of power, a new structure of power, a new dynamic of power that is an excrescency of monopolic financial capital, but not related to production, not related to even monopolic productive capital, but devoted specifically to speculation. And this is very significant to understand not only the limits of the solutions that they are imposing upon the world, but also the tremendous possibilities in political and technical terms to build up alternatives. They represent a very tiny minority, and their interests are every time and again against the interest of 7 billion human beings. So we need to build up the alternatives with very sound theoretical foundations. This is not a financial crisis that has been worsening. This is the financial implosion, the financial expression of much deeper causes. We are in the middle of the structural crisis of overproduction. The previous situation for the system was 100 years ago, and it opened the doors for 2 world wars. And this is very important to understand because that is the type of dangers that we have to face today. We need to build up a global alliance of all decent people in order to prevent a horizon of war, destabilization, and chaos. What is going on, and this is very difficult to admit, is that modern crises are not scarcity crises, like the economic textbook used to say. Those are the archaic type of crisis. Capitalism is prisoner of its own success. The productive elan of capitalism has created a flood of very cheap merchandises everywhere that do not support the pretensions of high profit rates. And that creates this absurd situation, this contradictory, paradoxical situation of overproduction. Not overproduction from the point of view of the species, of humanity, but from the point of view of the interest of capital. So part of the solution to this overproduction structural crisis that was symptomatic at the end of the 60s was precisely the main features of the current situation, globalization and financiarization. So we are living today the crisis of the remedies to the crisis, to the structural crisis of capitalism. So basically what we have here is, I don't know, it sounds difficult to believe it, but for example, 88 months ago expired the patent of 3D printers. But who knows the 3D printers? They imposed the patents just to preclude the possibility of the diffusion of this new technology. You have plenty of examples of programmed obsolescence in order to saturate markets, in order to create artificially new markets, in order to provoke new niches in the market for more profitability against the interest of the humankind and with a new and hyperbolic situation of waste capitalism and with a tremendous impact on the horizon of sustainability. So capital has to create new traps in order to provoke artificial monopolies. And that had a pervasive effect over the whole industrial organization in terms of the productive capital, but also has a tremendous demand over the performance of finance. And that is precisely one of the main new developments, irreversible developments that had created a new type of capitalism during the last few decades. Look at this. You have plenty of this material at the internet. This material is for you, is available, but nothing, there is no insider information. There are some insider information that could corroborate this for sure, but everything is in the internet. So everything is public. What is important is to put them together and to reflect upon the consequences of what is going on there. You have, in general, in all the developed economies, an either installed capacity of 30 or 40%. But that is out of a 100% that has been already eroded because of the reduced structure of incentives towards productive investment. And that is very important to see, because for the first time in history, there is a much more important effort to prevent the deployment of the current scientific and technical revolution than to commercially apply it, precisely because it's counterproductive in terms of this crisis of overproduction. Delocalization and the linking of investment had created a delinking of the relationship between finance and capital that had been the key of the success of capitalism since the Middle Ages, the Renaissance in Northern Europe. So we have a relative overproduction that reappear as a problem of monopolistic competition. And that is key to understand what is going on. This is a key feature that goes beyond the traditional concerns about macroeconomics and financial issues. If you see here, you have the 6 most important industrialized countries from the 60s, and in the black line, the gross black line is an approximation to the rate of profit. You have a tendency that comes after the Second World War that it was even higher than that. The tremendous manufacturer capacity of the United States at the end of the war was at the beginning open to possibilities with the process of decolonization, the Social Democratic Pact in the reconstruction of Europe, the New Deal also in the United States, the reforms, the structural reforms, the old structural reforms that the occupied Japan and Taiwan were subject to, and the Southeast Asia had, the agrarian reform, the administrative reform, the redistribution of income that created new markets for all this new capacity. And the transformation of that military use to civil use had some realization. But the problem of what Steindl mentioned as maturity and stagnation of the oligopolic markets had created such a profit squeeze accompanied by the pressure from the trade unions that provoke a political impasse. So there you have Reagan, Thatcher, and the neoliberal policies with the very slow transformation of the conditions in the center, but with a very important relationship with the rest of the world, especially the transfer of value, the transfer of excedence and surplus value from the periphery. The Volcker coup d'etat in 1979 with increase of the interest rates that render plenty of loans acquired at 1, 2, 3% at that time, suddenly from 9 to today to 22%, totally unviable. And the trap of the debt. You have in the right panel the net transfer of resources as a result of the debt. It was huge. But the triggering of all other mechanisms, macroeconomic manipulations that were part of the desperation of all the countries trying to get some excedent in order, some surplus in order to pay that debt, 150 countries trying to fight for shrinking markets with the effects on the terms of trade, with the race to the bottom in terms of tributary standards, labor standards, and environmental standards, created a much larger transfer of resources that improved the situation of the rate of profit in the north. That is very important because we are facing precisely a very similar episode, but the geopolitics today involves the neo-colonization of the metropolis. Not longer just the south, but also what we here this morning with Damon, the situation of Detroit, the situation in Puerto Rico, the whole submission of the continental Europe to the interest of speculative capital, okay? So, the formation of these semi-peripheries, first, the reconstruction of Europe after the Second World War, the first, the continental Europe, the reconstruction of the continental Europe, then the extreme east, then the tigers and the dragons. All this had created an exacerbation of the overproduction crisis, concentrated at the beginning in the core of the system, concentrated at the beginning in the same geography of the United States. So you have now the expression in terms of global imbalances and hegemony crisis disguised as a commercial war, as a exchange rate war. Part of this problem is that for the first time in geopolitical terms, the creation of these semi-peripheries are not under the military occupation of NATO. Contrary to what happens with continental Europe, with Japan, with Taiwan, with South Korea, now you have China, Russia, Brazil, South Africa that are not occupied by military bases of the United States, at least not directly. And that has created a lot of tension that it is very evident in the last few years, especially after 2009, with the breakup of China America, with the breakup of the explicit pact for some geopolitical arrangements of how to manage the global and financial imbalances created by the formation of this new semi-periphery. But that is not only a matter of figures. It's not only a matter of macroeconomic aggregates. That has a qualitative difference between the trend of labor productivity in the dotted line in the semi-periphery, in the new semi-periphery, especially in the BRICS countries, and the decline, the tendential decline of labor productivity in the core of the system. And that is also related to the new nature of those powerful attractors in the global scene out of the center of the system, expressed in the evolution of the multipliers of exports around with all the commercial partners, and imports. We don't have too much time to go into the details, but also in internal terms, the whole vigor of multipliers. No? You can see here the weakening of the multipliers, the Keynesian multipliers in the center, in the United States, in Europe, in Japan, basically because of the tertiarization. And now we are going to experiment the same type of weakening of the macroeconomic responses, for example, in China, because of the formal political decision of the Communist Party to devote more interest in the improvement of the domestic market with all the part of services and the tertiarization of the economy. So those are very important elements in order to understand the asymmetry, the tremendous macroeconomic asymmetry that we have now in terms of the capabilities to respond to the crisis. Well, we don't have too much time to go into the details. All this material is going to be here for you to go into the detail. But then the transfer of the industrial primacy of the old triad, what during the 70s was a bloc, a geopolitical bloc of the trilateral, to a new semi-periphery are worsening the structural problems of overproduction. And the, I don't know if funny or tragic situation is that the recipe that the commanding heights of the world are proposing is to asphyxiate markets. If you have a problem of overproduction, what you need is to expand markets. But the austerity policies are only asphyxiating markets, are cutting wages, are cutting budgets, and are reducing contracts, are reducing the price of commodities from the south that render the type of revenue that could buy more exports from the north. So this is not a zero-sum game. This is a shrinking-sum game that is going to exacerbate the conflict. The linking also, the consumption and income paces had created a structural trap in terms of indebtedness. You can see here that is the evolution in the case of the United States. In the black dotted line, you have the evolution of consumption as percentage of the GDP, and in the black dot, you have the evolution of wage, the part of the wage in the GDP. And during the golden years, the so-called Fordist regime of accumulation, you have a co-evolution. You have more money, you consume more. But with the neoliberal policies, you have a gap, a reduction in the path of wages, but an increase in the path of consumption. So that gap, structurally, must be filled with debt. But the point is, the neoliberal economists used to say, okay, but you need to live within your possibilities. But if you converge the evolution of consumption with the evolution of wages, the recession should have started at the beginning of the 80s. There is no other solution. So this is not a flaw in the moral character of the populations of Greece or the United States or Spain. This is a structural need of capitalism as it is. And the reduction in the share of wage income within the GDP is going to be worse and worse with the austerity policies. And obviously, the composition and the dynamics of debt is going to explode. Even if I can agree with Stephanie's analysis about the role of the public debt, the weight of the service of the debt in terms of distributional issues is tremendous. Because this is linked also to the tendency to the parasitarian and hypertrophic development of finance. Innovative finance are not only the irresponsible attitude of some regulators that could be also part of the problem. It's not only the casino spree of the population that could be part of the situation. It's also another vector, another structural vector of the structural crisis of capitalism. You can see here, and you can find the same type of graphs for the rest of the triad, that during the Fordist Keynesian regime of accumulation, the golden years of capitalism, you have also a co-evolution. You gain more, you have more profits, you invest more. So the relationship between profits and productive investment were parallel. That was the origin of the whole literature about the multiplier accelerated models. But with the neoliberal policies, you have a cleavage there. The gap now between the increase in profits that we already see and the reduction of productive investment necessarily opens the door for the hypertrophy of the financial sector. And this is not only in quantitative terms. The gap that you see there in gray had also, well, we can go into the details there, but we don't have too much time. But it's not only a quantitative issue. It's a huge quantitative issue. But it's also a qualitative problem. The nature of the financial evolution has changed during the last few years. Look, in black, those are the figures of the World Bank. In black, you can see the rate of growth of global GDP, the size of the pie, of the real economy. You can see that the volatility increases and a constant reduction in the level of growth, the average level of growth. Opposite to the orange line that shows you the exponential rate of growth of derivatives during the last few years. That has rendered some very new phenomenon in the history of capitalism. You have a relationship in terms of the, in financial terms, the only source of financial gains are the subjacent productive asset. The subjacent productive assets of all those financial investments are the real economies. The global real economy for 2010 was $63 trillion. Is an approximate measure of the real size of the economy. The normal debts, household debts, student debts, enterprises debts, public debts, sum up $212 trillion. Already there you can see that there is a problem of insolvency, structural problem of insolvency. The figures for today are something like 70 and 225. And the trend is going up. But the new feature in the functioning of the system is really frightening. It's the existence of this new type of debt that are called the financial derivatives. These type of debts do not resist even the double party accounting. This is an erosion of the principle of private property. It is not the communists, not the anarchists that has destroyed the principle of private property. It's the financial derivatives. Those are bets in the loaded dice casino of the global economy. And those, according to some figures, could reach, I don't know, $1.5 quadrillion, $2 quadrillion. The figures of the Basel Bank of Settlements is $600 trillion. The Office of the Comptroller of the United States had another set of statistics, $648 trillion. They are not compatible. It is not a coincidence that given the huge importance and delicacy of this type of financial weapons of mass destruction, in the words of Warren Buffett, nobody has cared to have a discipline and rigorous statistics of those type of evolutions, no? But the real point is, like in the musical chairs, you have you have only 6 chairs, you have, I don't know, 21 dancers, and suddenly 150 new dancers coming to the party. Could you imagine what is going on the moment in which the music stops? So the solution for the central banks is to keep the music going on, introducing a new dancer every 5 minutes. Is there a solution for this? And of course, those resources cannot be translated in terms of productive investment, in terms of productive credit, productive loans. Precisely because there is a problem of overproduction. There is a problem of a realization of those goods and services. So all this money goes to more speculation. All this money is going to inflate the flows in the financial markets, each time more and more detached from the needs of the real economy. Look, the recurrence of those bubbles. But look also in the long-term perspective. Those are statistics from the 1600s to today. In terms of proportion, there is no antecedent to the level of disproportionality and the connection between the functioning of the stock markets and the real economy. And of course, the results in terms of income distribution are very heavy. You can see in the white line the evolution of financial profits in comparison to the evolution of the GDP and in comparison to the evolution of the rest of the profits in the economy. Well, you can. The results in terms of wealth are tremendous. This is a topological expression of the nodes and the ownership relationships among 37 million corporations in this database of 2007. Shows you that only 147 control 40% of the GDP, of the global GDP. This is not the 1% against the 99%. This is the 0.00001%. And this is without taking into account the tax havens. All the network of islands, mostly part of the British Commonwealth, that are the monument for opacity. And you can see which are the main actors in this map of the structural power in the world. Mostly the banks. And precisely the same banks out of corruption, incompetence, had created the crisis, the financial implosion. The same banks that are receiving charity from the central banks of the United States, Europe, Switzerland, England, Japan. Is this going somewhere? After all the trillions of dollars that has been poured into the financial system, is today the financial system healthier than 10 years ago? And the key of that situation has been mentioned in this conference, the shadow banking. Shadow banking is the new relationship, the new type of liquidity neglected by the academia based upon the circulation and the manipulation of the derivatives. And that had displaced the axis of functioning of the financial system at the global level. Balance of payments of each country are less and less related to real issues, the traditional, exchange rate issues or learner elasticities, nothing to do. Larger and larger proportions of the balance of payments of each country are related to the functioning of this shadow banking at the global level. More and more functions of the central banks are related to the lubrication of the functioning of the shadow banking. Totally out of the control of regulators, totally out of the control of the legislative frameworks of each country, and totally out of the vision even of the radar of the international multilaterals and the international representative institutions. Okay, so we don't have too much time to go into the details. At the core of this map of the structure of ownership of the big corporations, you can see the main actors. And you can see represented here the big banks protagonist of the current crisis and protagonist of the current solution, between quotes, of the crisis, related directly to a huge process of massive dispossession, as Jamie mentioned before, a huge process of income polarization, and with one very clear outlet, the industrial military complex. You can see here, it's maybe you have better statistics, but this is, as I mentioned, this is what is available at the internet. Those are adjusted by inflation, US military spending. You can see what happens after the Kennedy's assassination. You can see then the peace of the Vietnam peace, the fall of the Berlin Wall, the dividend of the peace dividends, the Monica Lewinsky coup d'etat, the war against terrorism, and suddenly you have a reduction in the sales. Very dangerous for the rest of the world. Very dangerous. Because we are talking about $1 billion business here. Latin America, 5 centuries ago, was a victim of a genocide in the name of God and civilization. Now, the fashion is to bomb countries in the name of freedom and democracy. Let's have an environment of respect to the international law, to work with stable societies, and to build up the conditions for a green global New Deal. There are plenty of possibilities to do that. The old financial architecture is based upon a global and hierarchical system of debts that are going to grow and grow and grow forever, that dictates the possibilities of production and consumption of 7 billion people. We are not talking about the morals of hardworking people. We are talking about the impossibility to work that the austerity policies and the public debt trap is creating everywhere. The domination of private monopolies, of money debt issuers, speculative finance, securitization, and liquidity operations had replaced the democratic institutions all around the world. The transnationalization of finance and the financiarization of transnationals has distorted the role of big productive enterprises, had transformed the priorities of the main actors in our societies. Decades ago, what was good for General Motors was good for America. Today, what is good for Goldman Sachs is good for America? Is good for the rest of the world? Non-democratic corporations, non-democratic institutions had much more power of decision than 7 million human beings. And as it happened 100 years ago, the ghost of war is always profitable. So look what are the type of solutions that usually macroeconomists used to be obsessed about. The macroeconomic imbalances. You have there the contributions of the different countries to the deficits, the external deficits. And it was supposed that China, India, the countries from the south were going to finance the deficits from the north. Look, that is the real economy, and that are the effective flows of finance. The size of the lines shows, and the arrows shows you the direction and the amount of resources mobilized in the effective financial system. Where is the line from China, which is the financial flow from China or India or Brazil towards the United States or Europe? Not at all. We are living a total delinking of the real economy with respect to the functioning of the financial system. We need to recover a dynamic coherence between the development of finance and the development and the needs of the productive system. And in order to do this, and the same happens with the BRICS. The BRICS are also part. The BRICS are also part of the speculative system. So this is not a claim to take sides in the international dispute of power. We need to transform the global financial architecture. We need to transform the priorities in the world. The financial hypertrophy leads to an agenda of destabilization because for the speculative financial capital, it is not important to recover the loans. They are not interested in the repayment of the loans. The experience of Latin America, the experience of the Southeast Asia, the experience of Africa shows you that the business is in the perpetuation of the debts. We need to transform that logic, this parasitary and predatory logic, in order to have other type of situation. The unsustainable balance of sheet makeup had created such a distortion in the functioning of the economy that is plenty of needs for a political, democratical decision in order of defining which are the priorities for the North and for the South. And in order to have this, we have plenty of money. Look, in the Bernie Sanders report, we have $16 trillion. The University of Missouri in Kansas City corrects the figure to $29 trillion. So it's plenty of resources for culture, education, science, technology, full employment, infrastructure, and civilized solution to the crisis. But of course, no dollar is spent on this, but it's always plenty of money for the banks and for war. So we need a new financial architecture that could resolve the structural distortion of the financial markets, the structural distortion of the price formation at the international level, with the total manipulation of the LIBOR, the interest rates, the exchange rates, the basic commodity prices, the oil and the energy prices. Any discussion, any long-term decision in terms of the sunk cost of fixed capital are totally distorted. We need to create a new financial architecture based upon the re-regulation of the financial markets and the reorientation of finance in order to relaunch the economy, taking advantage of the new discoveries, the new innovations of the scientific and technical revolution. We have plenty of resources, even in Latin America, for example. That is part of the absurdity. Latin America is entering now in a new phase of recession when we have plenty of resources. Latin America is a net lender to the rest of the world. So Ecuador has proposed a new regional financial architecture with a new type of development bank, a new type of central banking, and a new type of currency system based upon a system of payment compensation, a clearing union, that could be, in this case, well, I have a lot of material to give you, but could give you a new institutionality with the Bank of the South, the Fund of the South as an alternative to the International Monetary Fund, and the new regional system of compensation called the Sucre that could set up the conditions for a new type of integration. Maybe the possibility of block regional monetary and credit arrangements could open the doors for a multipolar world that could make viable in the very near future the possibility of a relaunching of the economy under the horizon of the humanitarian and democratic values. Thank you very much.
Pedro, thank you for that scorching and inspiring synthesis. Well, we've come to the end. I think we have really achieved the major goal of this conference, which was to build a bit of a bridge between our friends in South America and our friends in Europe. And I'm pleased to report to you that the air traffic control that manages that bridge is back in function. So those of you who are expecting to get out will probably be able to do so. When we return in 2 years, I'm going to arrange the opposite so that you actually get in on time and then are delayed in leaving. That would be much better from my point of view. But I do want to say a final word of thanks, first of all, to our sponsors, and particularly the external sponsors, the Hans Berkler Foundation, the Institute Veblen, the Institute for New Economic Thinking, and the European Economic and Social Commission. I want to say a great word of thanks to all of you who really took the time and made the long trek to come here for this, I think, rather remarkable 2 days, if I do say so myself. This has been an opportunity which I hope will bear fruit in the months and years ahead. And then finally, as before I let you go, and there will be a dead run to the shuttles for at least a few, let me just say that this is all of this is would simply not be possible and is entirely due to the extraordinary competence and teamwork of our staff. And so let me just mention them, and perhaps you can wave. Nina Nguyen, Sally Dixon, Kelly Pratlett, Debbie Bunch, Loveday Grossman, Lisa Johnson, and the technical teams, Gary, Sasha and James, Jen and Jennifer. Look, thank you all very much indeed. This has really been, I think, an event of great value and very much, as I said before, in the tradition of the LBJ School and to the credit of the University of Texas. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, really.